Robert Caldwell had never expected to inherit 120 acres of pristine woodland from his grandfather. As a 35-year-old environmental lawyer in the city, land ownership had never been part of his plan. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of a magnificent forest that stretched before him like an emerald sea, now legally his. "Your grandfather wanted you to have it," the family attorney had explained, handing over a worn leather portfolio containing the deed and other documents. "He believes you'd protect it when others wouldn't." Robert traced his fingers over the property lines on the yellowed survey map. The forest had been in his family for 3 generations. His earliest memories included camping trips with his grandfather, learning the names of trees and tracking deer through morning mist. As a child, he'd thought the woods were magical. As an adult, he understood they were something even more precious, increasingly rare undeveloped land. The property was situated just outside a rapidly expanding suburb called Oak Ridge Hills, making it increasingly valuable to developers. Within weeks of the inheritance becoming public knowledge, Robert began receiving calls and letters with offers to purchase. Some were polite, others were not. $2 million is more than fair, insisted one developer over the phone. "You're a city boy. What are you going to do with all those trees?" Robert declined politely but firmly. The next day, the offer increased to $3 million. The Oak Ridge Homeowners Association was particularly persistent. Their upscale community bordered the south edge of his property, and they had plans to expand. Luxury homes in their development started at $750,000, with HOA fees that ensured manicured perfection throughout the neighborhood. Victor Harrington, the HOA president, sent increasingly elaborate proposals. First came professionally bound presentations, then invitations to exclusive dinners, and finally a personal visit to Robert's downtown law office. "You have to understand the opportunity here," Victor explained, leaning forward in his tailored suit, gold watch catching the light as he gestured. "Our residents demand a certain atmosphere. Your grandfather's land is the logical extension of our community vision." "My grandfather's vision was quite different," Robert replied calmly. Victor's smile tightened. "He was from another time. Progress is inevitable, Mr. Caldwell. So is conservation, Mr. Harrington." After Victor left, Robert's assistant poked her head in. He seemed intense. "The worst kind of intense," Robert replied. "The kind that believes money should always win." That evening, Robert drove out to the property. The spring air was cool as he walked familiar paths, listening to the chorus of frogs and crickets. He stopped by the small cabin his grandfather had maintained near the stream that bisected the property. Inside, everything remained exactly as it had been. Fishing gear hung by the door. Warm books on forest ecology lined simple wooden shelves. And his grandfather's journal sat open on the desk, as if awaiting one more entry. Robert picked up the journal, finding the last page his grandfather had written. "Remember, the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. Those who seek to possess it never understand its true value." In that moment, Robert made his decision. He would not sell, not to developers, not to the HOA, not to anyone. He would honor his grandfather's legacy by creating a nature preserve that would remain untouched for generations to come. What Robert didn't realize was that the president of the HOA, Victor Harrington, wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no, and Victor had already made promises to investors that he couldn't afford to break. 6 months after inheriting the property, Robert had settled into a pleasant routine. Weekdays were dedicated to his environmental law practice in the city, while weekends found him at the cabin, gradually implementing his vision for the nature preserve. He'd connected with local conservation groups and even hosted a small team of university biologists cataloging the remarkable biodiversity of the forest. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October, Robert received a disturbing call from his cousin Ellie, who lived in a small house about a mile from the property. "You need to come see this," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're clearing trees on your land." "Who is?" Robert asked, already reaching for his car keys. "Oakridge. Those HOA people. They've got heavy equipment out here, Robert. They're taking down the old growth near the south boundary." Robert arrived at dawn the next morning, the first hint of sunlight revealing a scene that hit him like a physical blow. A wide swath of the forest, his forest, had been clear-cut. Where century-old oaks and maples had stood just days before, there was now raw, churned earth. Construction equipment stood like yellow predators across the wounded landscape, and workers were already beginning another day of destruction. Most disturbing were the survey stakes, bright orange markers extending in a precise grid, well beyond what Robert knew to be the property line that separated his land from the Oakridge community. Each stake bore a lot number. He counted quickly, at least 90 home sites planned. Robert approached a man in a hard hat reviewing blueprints on the hood of a truck. "Excuse me," Robert said, struggling to keep his voice level. "I'm Robert Caldwell. This is my property you're clearing." The man, SITEFORE man, embroidered on his jacket, barely glanced up. "Got the wrong information, buddy. This is the Oakridge North expansion. All approved and permitted." "No, you're mistaken. My property line is nearly a quarter-mile south of where you're working." The foreman sighed and pulled out a folded site plan. "Look, see this boundary line here? We're well within the Oakridge development zone. We've got all the permits. Take it up with Oakridge HOA if you've got a problem." Robert took photos of the site plan, noting the property boundaries shown were dramatically different from what he knew to be accurate. With growing alarm, he walked the perimeter of the construction zone, documenting everything with his phone camera. Workers continued their activities, unbothered by his presence. Back in his car, Robert immediately called his law firm colleague, Maya Chen, a specialist in property disputes and someone he trusted implicitly. "They're building on my land, Maya. Not just a few feet over the line. They've staked out lots for what looks like an entire subdivision." "Don't confront them directly yet," she advised after reviewing the photos he sent. "This is too organized to be a simple mistake. Let's document everything first, every stake, every tree they've removed, every piece of equipment on your property. And Robert, check your property records again. The original surveys, anything your grandfather might have left. Something doesn't add up here." That night in the cabin, Robert pulled out every document related to the property. His grandfather had been meticulous, keeping detailed records in a fireproof safe hidden beneath a floorboard, a precaution that had seemed excessive until now. Among the documents was a folder labelled Boundary Disputes, 2009. Inside, Robert found correspondence between his grandfather and the previous president of the Oakridge HOA, along with surveys conducted by 3 different companies. There was also a court filing and subsequent settlement agreement. As he pieced together the story, Robert discovered something that made his blood run cold, and then made him smile. 15 years ago, the HOA had attempted a similar encroachment, claiming confusion over the original property lines. His grandfather had not only fought them successfully, but had taken extraordinary measures to ensure it couldn't happen again. "Clever old man," Robert whispered, examining the final page of the settlement agreement. "You knew they'd try again someday." Over the next month, Robert carefully built his case while the HOA continued their confident construction project. 96 luxury homes were being developed, with the Oak Ridge HOA pre-selling properties at premium prices, advertising exclusive woodland living with nature at your doorstep. Robert took a leave of absence from his firm, converting the cabin into a command center. Maps and photographs covered the walls, and 3 laptops tracked different aspects of his investigation. Maya visited frequently, bringing additional legal resources and, occasionally, much-needed perspective. They're moving fast, she observed one evening, watching time-lapse footage from the wildlife cameras Robert had installed around the perimeter. The cameras, originally meant to capture deer and fox movements for the preserve project, now documented the daily encroachment of bulldozers and concrete trucks. They want to establish as much physical presence as possible before anyone can stop them, Robert replied. Classic adverse possession strategy, but they've miscalculated badly. Maya helped Robert engage a professional surveyor, Eleanor Washington, whose reputation for precision and integrity made her testimony unimpeachable in court. Eleanor confirmed Robert's suspicions. The HOA had deliberately misrepresented the property lines in their permit applications. They used county records from 1976, Eleanor explained, pointing to discrepancies in the documents. But your grandfather legally corrected these boundaries in 2009 after that first dispute. The updated surveys were filed with the State Land Office and the Environmental Protection Agency because of the watershed protections, but not with the County Planning Department. A deliberate oversight, Maya said. Almost certainly, Eleanor agreed. Someone did their homework, just not all of it. What the surveyor discovered next exceeded even Robert's hopes. His grandfather, anticipating potential disputes, had not only meticulously registered the corrected property lines with multiple government agencies, but had also installed subterranean property markers, small metal discs, embedded in concrete and detectable with specialized equipment, at 20-yard intervals along the entire southern boundary. These are legally definitive, Eleanor confirmed, and they're exactly where your grandfather's surveys show them to be, nearly a quarter-mile north of where Oak Ridge is currently building. Meanwhile, Robert had been quietly recording every interaction with the construction team, documenting each day's trespassing activity, and most importantly, building relationships with key officials at the Environmental Protection Agency, the County Water Authority, and the State Attorney General's office. The watershed running through Robert's property fed into the county reservoir, which gave him additional legal leverage. Any contamination from construction could potentially affect the drinking water for 3 surrounding communities. We should file for an emergency injunction now, Maya urged as they reviewed the mounting evidence. We have more than enough to halt construction immediately. Not yet, Robert replied, studying the latest promotional materials from Oak Ridge. The glossy brochure showed smiling families in front of architectural renderings of luxury homes surrounded by trees that were now piles of mulch. Let them finish the model homes first. Why wait? They're destroying more of your land every day. Robert pointed to the brochure's fine print. Pre-construction pricing ends when model homes are complete. Understanding dawned on Maya's face. They'll have more contracts, more buyers committed. Exactly. And the model homes are being built on the most obvious part of my property. Once those are complete, there's no way they can claim this was a simple misunderstanding about boundaries. You're not just looking to stop them, Maya realized. You want them financially liable for restoration. I want them to face the full consequences of what they've done, Robert said quietly. My grandfather gave me this land to protect. I intend to do that and make sure no one tries this again. That night after Maya left, Robert hiked to the ridge overlooking the construction site. Floodlights illuminated the busy scene below as crews worked overtime to complete the model homes. Beyond them, the untouched portion of his forest stretched dark and peaceful under the stars. "Just a little longer," he whispered to the trees. "Justice is coming." 3 months into construction, the Oakridge North development was taking shape. 6 model homes stood complete, their stone facades and dramatic floor-to-ceiling windows designed to entice buyers. The HOA scheduled a lavish event to unveil these showcase properties and celebrate the pre-sales of nearly all 96 planned residences. Robert received an invitation, not as the neighbouring property owner whose land was being stolen, but as a potential buyer. The glossy card promised an exclusive preview of Oakridge's most ambitious luxury community with champagne reception and gourmet catering. "They don't even recognize your name," Maya said incredulously. "Different departments," Robert replied. "Their marketing team has no idea their development project is about to implode." Robert attended the event incognito, wearing glasses he didn't need and introducing himself as Rob Caldwell from the city. He mingled with excited buyers, mortgage brokers, and real estate agents, all buzzing about property values and return on investment. On a small stage erected before the largest model home, Victor Harrington addressed the crowd, champagne flute raised high. "What you're seeing today is the future of luxury living," he proclaimed, gesturing to the homes behind him. "We've preserved the natural beauty of the woodland setting while creating an exclusive community for those who appreciate the finer things. By this time next year, Oakridge North will be the most desirable address in the county." Robert recorded the entire speech on his phone, paying particular attention when Victor specifically mentioned property boundaries. "We've expanded Oakridge in the only direction that makes sense, north, into this pristine woodland that has been secured exclusively for our community." Secured. Robert noted the word choice. Not purchased. Not acquired legally. After the event, Robert spent Sunday finalizing preparations with Maya and their expanded legal team. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m. Monday morning, they unleashed a coordinated legal assault. First came the emergency cease and desist order, hand-delivered to the construction site by a court officer. Simultaneously, a comprehensive lawsuit was filed against the HOA, Victor Harrington personally, and the construction company, alleging willful trespass, environmental damage, fraud in permit applications, and a dozen other carefully documented violations. Within the hour, formal complaints were submitted to the County Building Department, Environmental Protection Agencies, and the State Attorney General's Office, each containing extensive evidence and citing specific regulatory violations. By noon, the first responses began. The county building inspector arrived and ordered all construction halted pending investigation. Environmental protection officials began taking soil and water samples from the site. Local news vans parked along the access road, reporters eager for statements. By 2 o'clock p.m., a judge had reviewed the emergency filing and issued a temporary restraining order halting all development activities. Victor Harrington and the HOA board members received the legal notices while hosting a meeting with their major investors in Oakridge's elegant clubhouse. Robert had timed the deliveries perfectly. The colour drained from Victor's face as he scanned the documents. Realizing the magnitude of their miscalculation, the investors, wealthy individuals who had fronted millions for the development, began asking pointed questions. "This is a minor property dispute," Victor assured them, his confident facade cracking slightly. "We'll settle with this tree hugger and move forward with minimal delays." An older investor leaned forward, tapping the environmental impact assessment with a manicured finger. This doesn't look minor, Victor. The EPA doesn't show up for minor disputes. Our lawyers will handle it, Victor insisted. These tactics are meant to extract a higher price for the land. It's negotiation through intimidation. By evening, the HOA's legal team had contacted Robert with an offer to discuss settlement terms. They proposed a meeting where they could resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding amicably. They were met with silence, no counter-offers, no negotiations, just the steady progression of legal machinery that Robert had set in motion. "They're panicking," Maya observed as they reviewed the increasingly desperate messages from the HOA's attorneys. "Good," Robert replied, "because we're just getting started." The legal proceedings moved with unusual speed, propelled by the blatant nature of the violations and the environmental implications of the case. The pre-trial discovery process revealed the full extent of the HOA's scheme, peeling back layers of deception that shocked even Robert and his legal team. Internal emails obtained through court orders showed conversations between Victor and the HOA board dating back 18 months. In one particularly damning exchange, Victor had written, "The Caldwell property is our only option for expansion. The old man turned us down for years, but he's gone now. His grandson is some city lawyer who'll either sell or be too busy to notice what we're doing until it's too late to stop it." Another board member had expressed concern. "These boundary issues seem problematic. The surveys don't match." Victor's response, "By the time anyone figures it out, we'll have models built and contracts signed. No judge will order demolition at that point. Too many innocent buyers involved. Worst case, we pay some damages and keep building." They had even created a spreadsheet calculating exactly how much it might cost to make the problem go away at different stages of development, with increasingly large settlement figures budgeted as construction progressed. They were counting on judicial reluctance to undo physical construction. Maya explained as they prepared for the preliminary hearing. "It's not entirely unreasonable. Courts often favor financial remedies over physical restoration when development has progressed significantly." What they hadn't counted on was Robert's patience, resources, and his grandfather's foresight. The courtroom was packed for the preliminary hearing. Local environmental groups, potential homebuyers, and even a few celebrities known for conservation causes filled the gallery. The HOA's attorneys arrived with a team of consultants and expert witnesses, prepared to argue boundary technicalities and offer substantial financial settlements. Robert sat quietly beside Maya as proceedings began. Victor Harrington, seated at the defendant's table, avoided eye contact. After initial arguments about property boundaries and surveying discrepancies, Judge Eleanor Ramsey, known for her no-nonsense approach, looked skeptically at the HOA's attorney. "Even if we set aside the boundary dispute for a moment, you've admitted your clients built on land they didn't purchase. You're arguing about how much they should pay in damages, not whether they trespassed. Is that correct?" "Your Honour, there were legitimate misunderstandings about." The judge cut him off. "Emails suggesting your clients deliberately proceeded despite knowing there were boundary discrepancies don't suggest misunderstandings to me, Councillor." It was then that Robert's team revealed their masterstroke. Maya stood, presenting a document that hadn't been mentioned in any of the previous filings. "Your Honour, we'd like to enter this into evidence. It's a conservation easement placed on the entire 120-acre property by Edward Caldwell, the plaintiff's grandfather, 15 years ago. The conservation easement, a legal agreement that permanently limits users of land to protect its conservation values, had been properly filed with the State Environmental Protection Agency and the National Land Trust Alliance. It legally restricted development on the property in perpetuity, dedicating the land as a nature preserve regardless of ownership changes. The HOA's attorney scrambled to his feet. "Your Honour, this document wasn't included in any title search we conducted." Maya smiled. "It wouldn't have been, Councillor. It was filed with environmental agencies, not county property records. However, it's fully binding and legally enforceable." "Your Honour," Robert's lead attorney addressed the court, "the defendants didn't just trespass and build on my client's land. They built on legally protected conservation land, making their structures fundamentally illegal under state and federal environmental protection laws." Judge Ramsey reviewed the documents in silence, the courtroom tense with anticipation. When she looked up, her expression was severe. "The ruling of this court is unequivocal. The Oak Ridge Homeowners Association knowingly trespassed and built on protected conservation land. All construction must cease immediately. The existing structures must be removed, and the HOA is responsible for complete environmental remediation according to standards set by state environmental authorities." As news of the ruling spread through local and then national media, the pre-sale contracts collapsed. Buyers demanded refunds. Investors, horrified by the emerging evidence of deliberate fraud, began filing their own lawsuits against the HOA and its officers personally. Within a week, Victor Harrington resigned in disgrace. Within 2, federal investigators arrived, opening inquiries into potential wire fraud and environmental crimes. 1 year later, Robert stood at the edge of his property, now transformed in ways he hadn't initially imagined. Where illegal construction had scarred the land, native trees and plants were being re-established through an ambitious restoration project, funded entirely by the substantial settlement he'd received from the HOA and its insurance carriers. The morning light filtered through young saplings, oak, maple and birch, planted in precise formations designed to accelerate the return of the forest ecosystem. University students collected data on soil regeneration, while environmental engineers monitored the watershed for signs of recovery. The remaining 96 partially built luxury homes had been carefully deconstructed over the winter months, their materials meticulously sorted and repurposed. The stone facades now formed the walls of a visitor centre near the property entrance. Timber framing had been reclaimed for research stations and observation platforms throughout the preserve. Even the concrete foundations had been crushed and repurposed as substrate for new hiking trails that wound through the property. "It's a complete reversal," said Dr. Elaine Porter, the restoration ecologist who had designed the recovery plan. "Usually we see forest converted to development. Seeing development return to forest is, well, it's professionally satisfying." Robert smiled. "My grandfather would have loved that description." The legal victory had been total. Beyond the immediate injunction and restoration requirements, the court had awarded Robert damages that went far beyond his legal expenses. The HOA's insurance had covered some costs, but the personal liability findings against Victor Harrington and 3 board members had forced liquidation of their substantial personal assets. Robert had used the majority of the settlement to establish an irrevocable trust that would protect the land in perpetuity and fund educational programs for local schools. The Edward Caldwell Forest Preserve, named for his grandfather, was now a centre for environmental education and research, with partnerships with 3 universities and a special program for inner-city children to experience nature. The legal repercussions continued to unfold. Victor Harrington and 2 board members now faced criminal charges for fraud, environmental violations, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The construction company had lost its license and paid significant penalties. Most dramatically, the case that prompted state legislation strengthening conservation easement protections and increasing penalties for environmental crimes. The Oak Ridge community itself had undergone dramatic changes. With the HOA in bankruptcy and its reputation destroyed, residents had reorganized under new leadership. Ironically, many had become supporters of the preserve, volunteering for restoration work and educational programs. "Your grandfather would be proud," Maya said, joining Robert for the opening ceremony of the new conservation center. She'd taken a leadership role in the Forest Preserve Trust, bringing her legal expertise to ensure its perpetual protection. "He planned for this," Robert replied. "Not exactly this outcome, but he knew what he was doing when he placed that conservation easement." Ellie, Robert's cousin who had first alerted him to the encroachment, now worked as the preserve's community outreach coordinator. She approached with a group of elementary school children, their excited voices carrying across the clearing. "These kids are from Oak Ridge Elementary," she told Robert. Some of their parents nearly bought homes in the illegal development. Robert watched as the children explored the newly established nature trails, their teachers guiding them through an identification exercise for native plants. Near the stream, a wildlife biologist was showing another group how to test water quality and count macroinvertebrates as indicators of ecosystem health. The Preservation Center itself had become a model for sustainable architecture, incorporating solar panels, rainwater collection systems, and natural climate control. Architectural journals had featured it as an example of repurposing construction materials with minimal waste. As the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, Robert walked to the small cabin his grandfather had maintained near the stream. He'd preserved it exactly as it had been, a reminder of simpler days and the man whose foresight had made all of this possible. On the cabin's porch, he opened his grandfather's journal and added an entry of his own. "The land doesn't just survive, it heals. And in protecting it, we find ways to heal ourselves." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the promise of a forest that would now stand protected for generations to come, and the legacy of a man who had understood that sometimes the best trap for greed is simply the law patiently applied.